Every spring, millions of people walk into garden centers and spend hundreds of dollars on tomato plants, pepper starts, and bags of seed. They water all summer. They weed. They harvest for a few weeks. Then the frost comes, everything dies, and next year they do the exact same thing all over again. They're stuck in a cycle that costs them time, money, and energy, year after year, with nothing to show for it when the season ends. But there's another way, a smarter way, one that most gardeners never learn because nobody talks about it. What if you planted food once, just once, and your children harvested it? What if your grandchildren did too? That's not a fantasy. That's how people fed themselves for thousands of years before the modern seed industry convinced us we needed to start over every single spring. Today, I'm going to show you foods that break the annual cycle. Foods that keep giving back, decade after decade, sometimes for a century or more. And by the time this video is over, you'll understand exactly why most people are doing this wrong, and how a few smart choices now can feed your family for generations. The first one is something most people have heard of but almost nobody plants correctly: the asparagus crown. Asparagus is one of the longest-lived food plants you can grow in a temperate climate. A single planting can produce harvests for 20, 30, even 50 years. There are documented asparagus beds in Europe that have been producing for over a century. But here's what most people get wrong. They see asparagus at the nursery, buy a few crowns, stick them in the ground, and expect results immediately. Then they harvest heavily in the first year, weaken the plants, and wonder why their asparagus bed fails after 3 or 4 seasons. The secret is patience. You plant asparagus crowns in deep trenches, let them establish for 2 full years without harvesting a single spear, and by year 3, you have a perennial food source that will outlast your mortgage. The math is remarkable. A well-maintained asparagus bed of just 25 crowns can produce over 10 pounds of asparagus per year. At grocery store prices, that's easily $100 annually. Over 50 years, that's $5,000 from a single planting that cost you maybe $40 to establish. This is what generational thinking looks like. You're not growing food for this summer. You're building infrastructure for the next half-century. There's another layer most people miss. Asparagus crowns multiply underground. After 10 years, your original 25 crowns have become 50. After 20 years, you have a bed so thick you could divide it and start a second patch, or give starts to your kids when they get their own place. You're not just growing food. You're creating a living asset that reproduces itself. Another powerful one that almost nobody considers is the rhubarb plant. Rhubarb is nearly indestructible. It tolerates cold that would kill most perennials. It comes back stronger every year, and a single plant can live for decades. Some rhubarb crowns have been passed down through families for generations. Literally, the same plant your great-grandmother harvested from. What makes rhubarb special is that it thrives on neglect. You don't need to baby it. You don't need to spray it. You plant it in a corner of your yard, give it some compost once a year, and it rewards you with massive stalks every spring. One mature rhubarb plant can produce 15 to 20 pounds of stalks per season. And because rhubarb is one of the first things ready in spring, it comes at exactly the time when fresh produce is most expensive and least available. The overlooked genius of rhubarb is division. Every 4 or 5 years, you can dig up your plant, split the crown into 3 or 4 pieces and replant them. Each piece becomes a new plant. So your one original investment multiplies itself over and over for as long as you're willing to do the work. Most people buy rhubarb at the store without realizing they could have an endless supply for the rest of their lives from a single $10 plant. One of the most overlooked options is the humble horseradish root. Horseradish is aggressive. Some would call it invasive, and that's exactly what makes it perfect for generational food production. You plant a single root cutting, and within 2 or 3 years, you have more horseradish than you know what to do with. It spreads through underground runners, colonizing whatever space you give it, and it's nearly impossible to kill. This is the key insight. The plants that survive for generations are often the ones that grow like weeds. They've evolved to persist. They don't need your help. They just need to be planted once and left alone. Fresh horseradish has a flavor that the bottled stuff can't match. And because it stores in the ground all winter, you can harvest it whenever you need it, even in frozen soil. You just dig down, pull a root, grate it, and you have condiment that would cost $5 or $6 at the grocery store. One planting, zero maintenance, unlimited harvests. The catch is that horseradish will take over if you let it. So you plant it in a contained area, maybe along a fence line or in a raised bed with buried barriers. Then you have permanent horseradish production without the permanent headache. Something most people walk right past is the Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchokes. This plant is native to North America, which means it's already perfectly adapted to the conditions in most of the continent. It doesn't need coddling, it doesn't need special care, it evolved here. Jerusalem artichokes produce edible tubers that taste like a cross between an artichoke and a potato. They're rich in a fiber called inulin, which is excellent for gut health. And the plants themselves grow 8 to 10 feet tall, producing beautiful yellow flowers that attract pollinators. But here's what makes them special for generational food production. You can never get rid of them once they're established. Every tiny piece of tuber you leave in the ground becomes a new plant. Miss a single tuber at harvest and it sprouts the following spring. This is frustrating if you want to remove them, but it's a gift if you want permanent food. You plant them once, in a dedicated area, and you have an endless supply of nutritious tubers for the rest of your life. They require no replanting, no purchasing new seed stock, no annual expense. Just dig what you need and leave the rest to grow. The Native Americans understood this. They cultivated Jerusalem artichokes for thousands of years, and many patches still exist today from plantings made centuries ago. That's real food security. If you're finding value in this, take a second to subscribe. This channel is for people who want to build systems that work for them instead of working for systems that drain them. We're building a community of people who think long-term, and you belong here. One that surprises most people is the Egyptian walking onion. This is an onion that plants itself. The bulbils that form at the top of the stalk eventually get heavy enough to bend the stalk over, and when they touch the ground, they take root. The onion literally walks across your garden, generation after generation. Egyptian walking onions have been cultivated for at least 1,000 years. Some patches in Europe are believed to date back to medieval times, still producing, still walking, still feeding people. You can eat every part of this plant. The bulbs underground taste like regular onions. The bulbils on top are like shallots. Even the green stalks are edible, similar to scallions. It's 3 vegetables in one, and it never needs to be replanted. The walking habit means the patch slowly migrates across your garden over the years. You can control this by harvesting the bulbils before they drop, or you can let nature take its course and follow your onions wherever they decide to go. Most people buy onion sets every spring, plant them, harvest them, and repeat the cycle. Someone growing Egyptian walking onions made one decision years ago and never had to make it again. Another one that builds real wealth over time is the fruit tree, but not the way most people think about it. Everyone understands that apple trees and pear trees produce for decades. But what most people miss is the difference between standard rootstock and dwarf rootstock. Dwarf fruit trees are popular because they're easy to manage. They stay small. You can pick the fruit without a ladder, but they typically only produce for 15 to 25 years before they decline. Standard rootstock trees can produce for 100 years or more. There are apple trees in America that date back to the colonial period, still bearing fruit, still feeding people. When you plant a dwarf tree, you're thinking about convenience for yourself. When you plant a standard tree, you're thinking about your grandchildren. The investment is similar. The work is similar. But one choice gives you fruit for your lifetime, and the other choice gives you fruit for generations. This is the core principle. Most modern gardening advice optimizes for short-term convenience. Generational thinking optimizes for long-term output. One of the most valuable plants almost nobody grows is the hazelnut bush. Hazelnuts, also called filberts, are one of the easiest nuts to grow in a home garden. They don't need the massive space of a walnut tree. They don't take decades to produce like pecans. A hazelnut bush can start bearing within 4 to 5 years of planting and keep producing for 50 years or more. The nuts are delicious, highly nutritious, and store for months without refrigeration. They're one of the few calorie-dense foods you can grow in a small space that truly contributes to food security. But here's what most people don't realize. Hazelnuts also make an excellent hedge. You can plant them along your property line, and within a few years, you have a living fence that produces pounds of nuts every fall. That's a boundary that pays you instead of costing you. Every year it produces food. Every year it gets more established. Every year your investment compounds. Compare this to a wooden fence that costs thousands of dollars, needs maintenance, needs replacement every 15 to 20 years, and gives you nothing in return. The hazelnut hedge costs less, lasts longer, and feeds you. This is how wealthy people think about property. Everything serves multiple purposes. Nothing is just an expense. Something that takes this principle even further is the black walnut tree. Black walnuts are native to eastern North America, and they're remarkable for several reasons. The nuts are delicious and valuable. The wood is among the most prized in furniture making, and the trees can live for 200 years. A mature black walnut tree can produce 200 to 300 pounds of nuts in a good year. Even at modest prices, that's real money. And the wood, if you ever needed to harvest the tree, can be worth $10,000 or more. But here's the generational thinking. You probably won't harvest a black walnut tree you plant. Your grandchildren might. And when they do, they'll thank you for a gift worth more than most things you could leave them. The tree provides shade, produces food, builds wealth, and requires almost nothing from you once established. You plant it and walk away. 50 years later, it's a family asset. Most people think inheritance means money in a bank account. But a productive piece of land with mature trees is wealth that keeps generating value, year after year, without being spent. A simpler option that works almost anywhere is the perpetual spinach, sometimes called leaf beet or spinach beet. Unlike regular spinach, which bolts quickly in summer heat and needs to be replanted constantly, perpetual spinach is a biennial that often behaves as a perennial in mild climates. One planting can produce leaves for 2 to 3 years, and if you let a few plants go to seed, they'll self-sow and keep the patch going indefinitely. The leaves taste similar to regular spinach, but are more heat-tolerant and more cold-tolerant. They can be harvested almost year-round, in many climates, and because the plants are so vigorous, you can cut them hard and they come right back. This is passive food production. You establish the patch once and it maintains itself. No annual seed buying, no careful timing, no worrying about bolting. Just walk out to the garden and pick what you need. Most gardeners spend enormous energy trying to keep regular spinach producing through the summer. Someone growing perpetual spinach solved that problem once and moved on to other things. One that works particularly well in shade is the good King Henry plant. This is an ancient vegetable, cultivated in Europe since at least Roman times, and probably much longer. It was a staple of medieval kitchen gardens, providing leafy greens in early spring when nothing else was ready. Good King Henry is a true perennial. You plant it once and it comes back every year, sometimes for 20 years or more. It tolerates shade, tolerates poor soil, tolerates neglect. It just keeps producing. The young shoots can be eaten like asparagus. The leaves can be cooked like spinach. The seeds are edible too. And the plant expands slowly over time, giving you more and more harvest as the years pass. This is exactly the kind of plant that our ancestors relied on, but that modern gardening has forgotten. It's not glamorous, it's not trendy, but it fed people for centuries and it can feed you for the rest of your life from a single planting. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who values real knowledge over surface-level content. Hit the like button. It helps more people find this information, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of deep, practical content matters. Another perennial vegetable that deserves attention is the sea kale plant. Sea kale grows wild on the beaches of Europe, which tells you everything about its toughness. It tolerates salt, wind, poor soil, and drought. Once established, it's nearly impossible to kill. In spring, you can blanch the emerging shoots by covering them with pots or buckets, and they become tender and delicious, similar to asparagus but with their own unique flavor. The plant produces for years and years, expanding slowly into a larger clump that gives you more harvest every season. Sea kale was a delicacy in Victorian England, served at the finest tables. Then it fell out of fashion when people discovered they could buy vegetables year-round from the grocery store. Now almost nobody grows it, which is a shame, because it's one of the most reliable perennial vegetables you can plant. One clump, established in a corner of your garden, will produce gourmet-quality shoots every spring for the next 20 to 30 years. That's the kind of planting that changes how you think about food. For fruit, few plants offer the generational value of the black currant bush. Black currants are incredibly productive. A single mature bush can produce 10 to 15 pounds of berries per year. The berries are rich in vitamin C, antioxidants, and have a complex flavor that makes excellent preserves, juices, and wines. The bushes themselves live for 15 to 20 years with minimal care, and they're easy to propagate from cuttings. So your original plants can become 10 plants, which can become 100 plants, all from that first investment. For decades, black currants were banned in much of the United States because they can host a disease that affects white pines. Those bans have been lifted in most states now, but the cultural memory of the ban means most Americans don't know what they're missing. In Europe, black currant is a standard crop. It's in drinks, desserts, preserves, medicines. Americans pay premium prices for imported black currant products without realizing they could grow unlimited quantities in their own backyards. One of the most cold-hardy options is the Saskatoon berry, also called the serviceberry or Juneberry. This is a native North American shrub that produces sweet, blueberry-like fruits in early summer. It's incredibly hardy, surviving winters that would kill most fruit plants, and it's long-lived, producing for 30 to 50 years or more. The berries were a staple food for Native American tribes across the northern plains. They were dried, mixed with fat and meat to make pemmican, and stored for winter. This is a plant with deep roots in the food traditions of this continent. Saskatoon berries taste like a cross between blueberries and almonds. They're excellent fresh, dried, or in preserves. And because the plants are native, they need no special care. They've already adapted to whatever conditions your area can throw at them. Most people who want berries plant blueberries, which require acidic soil that many gardens don't have naturally. They struggle with pH, add sulfur, amend constantly, and still get mediocre results. Someone who plants Saskatoons skips all that frustration and gets reliable harvests for decades. For ground cover that produces food, consider the lingonberry. Lingonberries are the small, red berries you see in Scandinavian cuisine. They grow on low, spreading plants that stay green year-round and produce 2 crops annually in some climates. The plants spread slowly by underground runners, eventually forming a dense mat that suppresses weeds and produces berries indefinitely. A patch established today could still be producing for your great-grandchildren. Lingonberries are extremely cold-hardy and tolerant of poor soil. They grow wild in the forests of northern Europe and Siberia, which means they're adapted to conditions harsher than most gardens will ever experience. The berries are tart, rich in vitamins, and make exceptional preserves. They're a natural partner for meats, and lingonberry jam is a staple condiment in Swedish cooking. This is ground cover that pays you. Instead of mulch that costs money and does nothing, You have a living carpet that produces food. Every square foot of your garden can be productive if you think creatively about what to plant. Another ground-level option is the alpine strawberry. Unlike regular strawberries, which spread by runners and need constant management, alpine strawberries form neat clumps that stay where you plant them. They produce small, intensely flavored berries from spring through fall, and they'll keep producing for 5 to 10 years from a single planting. The flavor of alpine strawberries is remarkable. These are the original strawberries, before breeders selected for size and shipping durability instead of taste. One small alpine strawberry has more flavor than a handful of the bland giants from the grocery store. They also tolerate more shade than regular strawberries, making them perfect for edges, borders, and underneath larger plants. You can tuck them into spaces that would otherwise be wasted, and they'll quietly produce berries for years. The plants self-sow readily, so if you let a few berries drop, you'll have new plants appearing. Over time, your alpine strawberry patch expands naturally, requiring no purchasing of new plants, no runners to manage, no annual replanting. For something that really builds long-term value, consider the chestnut tree. American chestnuts were once the dominant tree of eastern forests, producing billions of pounds of nuts annually. A blight wiped them out in the early 1900s, but hybrid varieties and blight-resistant cultivars are now available that can restore this incredible food source. Chinese and European chestnuts are also excellent options. They produce sweet, starchy nuts that can be roasted, boiled, or ground into flour. Unlike other nuts, chestnuts are low in fat and high in carbohydrates, making them more like a grain than a typical nut. A mature chestnut tree can produce 50 to 100 pounds of nuts per year, and it can do this for a century or more. That's food security that spans generations. The challenge is patience. Chestnuts take 7 to 10 years to begin producing, and 20 years to hit full production. This is why most people don't plant them. They want results now. But someone who plants chestnuts is building something bigger than themselves. They're creating a food source that will feed people who haven't been born yet. That's a different way of thinking about gardening. One more tree worth considering is the mulberry. Mulberries are one of the most underrated fruit trees in North America. They produce massive quantities of sweet berries. They're nearly indestructible, and they start bearing within just a few years of planting. A mature mulberry tree can produce 100 pounds of fruit or more in a single season. The trees live for decades, sometimes over a century, and they require almost no care. No spraying, no complicated pruning, no winter protection. The fruit is sweet, similar to blackberries but softer. It's perfect for eating fresh, making into preserves or drying. And because the trees produce so abundantly, there's always more than you can use, which means you can share with neighbors, trade, or even sell. Mulberries have one perceived downside. They're messy. The dark berries stain driveways and sidewalks. This is why most cities don't plant them, and why many homeowners avoid them. But if you place a mulberry tree thoughtfully, away from pavement, you get all the benefit with none of the mess. The staining that others see as a problem becomes a non-issue, and you get a lifetime of free fruit for the cost of a single tree. The final one I want to share is the grapevine. Grapevines can live for over 100 years. Some of the oldest productive vines in California date back to the 1850s, still producing quality fruit. But grapes aren't just wine. Table grapes, raisins, grape juice, grape leaves for cooking. They're one of the most versatile food plants you can grow. A single established vine can produce 30 to 50 pounds of fruit annually, and it keeps producing, year after year with basic pruning. The key insight is that grapes improve with age. Young vines produce decent fruit. Old vines produce exceptional fruit. The root system deepens, accessing water and nutrients that younger plants can't reach. The vine learns its environment and becomes more resilient. This is the opposite of annual gardening, where you start over every year and never build on what came before. With grapes, every year adds to what you've already accomplished. The longer you tend a vine, the more it gives back. Let me bring this all together. Every year, billions of dollars flow from home gardeners to seed companies, nurseries, and garden centers. Most of that money is spent on plants that will be dead by winter, requiring the whole cycle to start again next spring. That's not gardening, that's subscription farming. You're paying rent on your food supply instead of owning it. The plants I've shown you today break that cycle. They're not trendy, they're not flashy. Most of them have been feeding families for centuries, quietly, reliably, without demanding attention or money. The asparagus that produces for 50 years, the fruit trees that outlive you, the nut trees that become family heirlooms, the berry bushes that spread and multiply on their own, the perennial vegetables that come back every spring without being asked. This is what food security actually looks like. Not a stockpile of canned goods that expires and needs to be replaced, but a living system that produces food continuously, that gets stronger over time, that can be passed down to your children and their children after them. You don't have to plant all of these. You don't have to transform your entire yard this weekend. But I challenge you to pick three. Just three. But I challenge you to pick three. Just 3 plants from this list that make sense for your space, your climate, your family. Plant them this year, take care of them, and watch them become the foundation of something that lasts. 10 years from now, you'll still be harvesting from those 3 plants. 20 years from now, they'll be established and mature. 50 years from now, someone might be harvesting from them who isn't born yet. That's the difference between gardening for a season and building for generations. One decision, planted once, feeding your family forever. Make the smart choice, start now. If this changed how you think about food and gardening, subscribe. We put out content every week for people who want to build systems that work for them, not against them. And leave a comment telling me which plant you're going to start with. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.